Oh, my son's room. Oh, I have my notes, and last of all, okay, I have to talk to you about November 5th. But before I do that, I have to talk to you about this person. This is my grandfather, well, step-grandfather, on my mom's side. Long story. Growing up in the 1980s, my house was pretty agnostic when it came to religion and politics. I didn't really grow up in a home that discussed those issues very much, if at all. But I do remember my grandfather introducing me to this area called politics. He was drafted into the Army, where he served in the 23rd Tank Battalion, which is part of the 12th Armored Division, C Company, under General George S. Patton. Yes, that George S. Patton. He saw the Europe theater, saw many friends die. In fact, his promotion to tank commander came after his commander was killed in action. So that gives you an idea of what he saw. After the war, he put away his uniform, never looked at it again. Then he married, had a family, and got divorced. And by the late 1960s, he had met my grandmother, who was also a divorcee. Ironically, they met through her first husband, who was actually my biological grandfather, but we don't need to talk about him. I remember visiting my grandparents one day, sitting in front of the TV, watching Ronald Reagan give a speech. And then off to the side, I heard my grandfather mutter, "What an absolute disgrace." Now here's something you have to know about my grandfather. He was a conservative, but not the conservative that we know today. Also very pro-union. He was a big fan of the UAW. We'll talk about that in a little bit. He also told me once that he only ever voted once in his life. One time. Because he thought everybody else was just sold out. And that one person that he voted for was Dwight D. Eisenhower, the guy that gave the speech about
the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
But for the most part, we didn't really talk about it in my house because my mom was not a citizen. She was born in England, and she never got a full citizenship here. She remained a resident until her passing last year. So there really wasn't much to talk about. But as I got older, while I was in high school, going into college, I noticed a few trends. For starters, anytime I read about a president during my parents' lifetime or even my lifetime, there sure seemed to be some kind of scandal relating to Republicans. You remember this guy? He gave a farewell speech too, but not before saying,
"Well, I'm not a crook."
Well, shortly after that, we found out he was. They made a movie about it. It's pretty good. You should check it out. Then there was this guy. He was actually from Michigan. He didn't seem to do much of anything, though, except pardon the last guy for his crimes. I never asked my grandfather about it, but I'm sure he didn't like it. I mean, when you have to testify before Congress to make your case in front of the American people? Oh. Anyway, let's move on to the next Republican. This guy, the Gipper. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here because there are a lot of folks of my generation and older who think that Ronald Reagan was the best president of their lifetime. But I don't have 4 hours to go into why this guy sucks. You can just watch Some More News and their analysis. They actually do a really good job of keeping tabs of all of the problems that Reagan had caused throughout the world. Let's just say, for his telegenic presence and his ever whip-smart quips about, this celebrity or that celebrity he knew, his presidential run was not that good. Iran-Contra, the AIDS crisis, eliminating regulations, tax cuts to non-military programs, benefiting the wealthy, the savings and loan scandal, gutting labor union protections. That last one really pissed off my grandfather. Like I said, he was a union guy. He worked for the Ford Motor Company till his retirement in '88. So, yeah, that did not sit well with him at all. Jumping forward, we can go to the next president, who was George H.W. Bush. Now, he is the guy that Captain Willard in Apocalypse Now would describe thus.
He was being groomed for one of the top slots in the corporation.
And indeed, prep school, Yale, Phi Beta Kappa, the Skull and Bones. I mean, he was, after all, former chair of the RNC and also head of the U.S. Liaison Office in China and director of the CIA under Gerald Ford. Yeah, that last role, he did some things that I don't like. He oversaw something called Operation Condor. No, not the Jackie Chan film. This was a covert campaign of coups d'etats, assassinations, and political suppression of leftists in Latin America. And while this was going on, he would also support right-wing dictators like Augusto Pinochet. Tens of thousands dead, hundreds of thousands imprisoned, weakened democracies, intergenerational trauma, an overall black spot in U.S. diplomacy. Yeah, especially when it was revealed that one of the puppet leaders, Manuel Noriega of Panama, had been a CIA asset under Bush's tenure. That is, up until his apprehension. Yeah, not good. Not a good thing that was done under Bush's watch. And also, all of the international interference was something that my grandfather didn't like. Granted, he was an isolationist, but that's a topic for another day. But right now, let's skip the 8 years long oral fixation on this guy and head over to Texas by way of Connecticut to this make-believe rancher, W. I'm just going to let Adam Friedland here explain why this guy was terrible. Not the guy on the left. I mean, he sucks too.
You had Reagan was the president when you were a teenager, right?
Yes.
Okay. When I was a teenager, Bush was the president, and I fucking hated Bush.
Hey, why would you ever invest that in anybody else?
Because they killed 1 million people. It's wrong. But like, come on, like they went to the UN and they made up shit to go to fucking war. It was wrong.
Listen, I agree. I never accepted the yellow cake thing. I lived it in real time. I went over there in real time. I felt the backlash from the American people, one of the greatest propaganda moves in my lifetime, 25 plus years in this business. We are railing on Bush for there having been no WMDs, weapons of mass destruction. Mm-hmm. And they come up with a great spin. I forget who it was. Maybe Ari. I forget.
Fleischer.
Ari Fleischer, thank you. They come up with the following spin. Hey, this no WMD, this yellow cake stuff, this ersatz, all that stuff. Stop saying that. You're hurting morale. The American people believed it, stopped watching the news. And you know what we started to do? I was at ABC News at the time.
Uh-huh.
We stopped saying it.
Bitch.
Yeah, so this was not great. I had a really hard time keeping friends up to, before, and during the Iraq War because I was opposed to it. And it's not like I'm a genius. I'm not the smartest person in this room. He is. Michael Moore, for all of his problems, he actually was smart in not using the footage of the planes hitting the Twin Towers in Fahrenheit 9/11. Because he saw what I saw. He saw the narrativizing. He saw the manufacturing of consent. He knew that our cable and local news outlets had already played that footage. The constant war drumbeat of vengeance being pounded into our eyes day after day after day. I'm not a soothsayer. This is just the media doing its job. Well, doing its job by keeping the doors open. MAGA types would probably laugh in my face if I ever used the term collective trauma because it sounds like an egghead term from academia. But it's not. It's a real phenomenon. And we all experienced it. Those of us who were still alive at the time on 9/11. So with the benefit of hindsight, ask yourself this question. What do you think that does to a population? I can give you an obvious answer, since I lived it. It gives the powers that be permission to do anything. Using flimsy artwork that looked like fucking placemats in place of actual photographic evidence, Colin Powell would later say of his presentation in front of the UN, I of course regret the UN speech that I gave, which became the prominent presentation of our case. But we thought it was correct at the time. Yeah, right. The president thought it was correct. Congress thought it was correct. Of course, I regret that a lot of it turned out to be wrong. Well, suffice it to say, not everybody bought into that plot. Well, gee, thanks, Colin. Thanks for your contribution in admitting after the fact that we sent over $1 trillion of weapons into a region that wasn't part of the problem that started it. So let's recap with our Republican presidents. We have a crook, an accessory after the fact, a fabricator, a charlatan, and an agent provocateur. These are your Republican presidents of the last 50 years, within my lifetime. Okay? So fine. Let's talk about the Democrats, shall we? Now, before I drive you out into the middle of nowhere to talk about the Democratic presidents, I do have to bring up something that I left out while I was talking about the Republicans. And that is another Republican. His name was Lee Atwater. And it's okay if you don't know who it is, because most people under 45 don't know who he is. He was born in Georgia in 1951, and he served as a political consultant for the GOP at large, as well as an advisor to Reagan and H.W. respectively. Later, he would be named chair of the Republican National Committee. Well, in 1981, Atwater was serving in the Reagan administration when he granted an interview to a political scientist, Alexander P. Lamis. Lamis would later write the book, The Two-Party South, which, according to its publisher, quote, explains how the Democratic Party came to abandon the Southern cause of white supremacy during the 1970s, causing a solidly Democratic South to give way to the two-party system that currently exists, unquote. Now, Atwater allowed Lamis to record the conversation for the sake of accuracy. So I just want to bear in mind that there's actual audio of Lee Atwater talking about his time behind the scenes with the GOP. Some years ago, The Nation published some of that audio to its YouTube channel. And so here's some of it for you now. Oh, and trigger warning, it's pretty racist.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all want to quote me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger, that hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
You know, I got to thinking about that. How was it that he was so into the weeds with the political party that was trying to reform itself? How was it that he thought it was necessary to make the language more abstract? Tells you how far we've come, right? So anyway, let's talk about the Democratic Party and their presidents. I mean, what were their worst offenses? Let's see. Jimmy Carter. You know, the funny thing here that I've noticed about Jimmy Carter critics, usually they're the ones that say, well, what is he known for? He didn't do anything. Oh, I'm so sorry. He didn't start a war during his tenure. How can you remember the man? Okay, so what did he do exactly that was the worst offense? Probably fall asleep at the switch during the uprising in Iran, where the US-friendly government was overthrown in favor of whatever it is we're dealing with now, where we have Khamenei and he's the supreme leader, so even the president doesn't have that much power. And is there even a prime minister? I mean, who knows? That was his worst offense, was not overthrowing the overthrow of the Iranian government. Bad Jimmy. Won't do that again. All right, so what was Bill Clinton's worst offense? Well, I think that's pretty easy, and it's not Monica Lewinsky or Paula, whatever her name is. I'm sorry, I've forgotten already. Yes, the guy's a sex pest. We can all agree. But that's not the worst thing he ever did. No. The worst job he did as president was, aside from the crime reform bill and the welfare cuts, he also sold the American manufacturing sector for scrap under NAFTA, as well as agreed to the General Agreement on Trades and Tariffs, also known as GATT. Jello Biafra talks about this at length in his very overlong spoken word CD, If Evolution is Outlawed, Only Outlaws Will Evolve.
The Reagan and Bush got away with Contragate, drug running, assassinations, killing 5,000 people in Panama, keeping the hostages in Iran until after Reagan beat Carter in the election, letting savings and loan crooks run off with billions of dollars that we wind up paying for. All of those were impeachable offenses. I mean, if Clinton goes down just because of his dick compared to what they got away with, we really are living in the fall of Rome. We really are.
because, capitalism, baby. The red line ain't going to go up on its own. Oh, that's right. We forgot to talk about Barack Hussein Obama. It's really funny that Ann Coulter thought that was going to be something that triggered the libs.
I just want to mention, liberals hysterical with me throughout the campaign for calling him Hussein Obama. We found out yesterday that's what he likes to be called. As president, he wants to be known as Barack Hussein Obama.
How do you know that?
He announced it yesterday.
Where did he announce it?
I don't know. Wherever he announces things. Where does he announce anything?
Yeah, how did that work out, Ann? Were you laughing between 2009 and 2016? I know I was. What was the worst thing that Mr. Obama did during his tenure, besides, continue the Middle Eastern occupation project, which precluded any criticism of the troops, no matter what they were directed to do? Now, what was the worst thing he did? Oh, that's right. He signed the ACA, also known as the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, but that is not the problem here. There was something else about him. What was it? What was it exactly? I can't seem to put my finger on exactly what it was. I'll think about it later. But in the meantime, let's move on. Sorry, I have to add another portion to this video. I know it just keeps growing. But I failed to mention something else. Remember what I said about Republicans versus Democrats? Well, what happens when they work together? Well, it turns out that a lot of the policies that they pass aren't really a function of popular support. As a matter of fact, there is a nonprofit group called Represent Us, which took a look at a Princeton study that surveyed over 1,800 public opinion polls against what was passed for legislation in Congress. And it turns out we don't really factor in a whole lot. It's usually the 0.5% of America who are in the upper tiers, the millionaire and billionaire class, and also lobbying groups that also function as a measure of whether or not a bill actually gets passed. So it doesn't really matter what issue you are behind. I was trying to think of a way to circle back and address the Republican Party once more, but this time I wanted to focus on the supporters, the voting base, the people who have felt as though they lost their voice in this country. And they seem very struck by this notion that they might feel left behind. It makes me think about the poem that I keep seeing pop up in social media from Charles Bukowski. They are everywhere. That's the title. I could just read it here. The tragedy sniffers are all about. They get up in the morning and begin to find things wrong, and they fling themselves into a rage about it. A rage that lasts until bedtime, where even there they twist in their insomnia, not able to rid their mind of the petty obstacles they have encountered. They feel set against. It's a plot, and by being constantly angry, they feel that they are constantly right. You see them in traffic honking wildly at the slightest infraction, cursing, spewing their invectives. You feel them in lines, at banks, at supermarkets, at movies. They are pressing at your back, walking on your heels. They are impatient to a fury. They are everywhere and into everything, these violently unhappy souls. Actually, they are frightened. Never wanting to be wrong, they lash out incessantly. It is a malady, an illness of that breed. The first one I saw like that was my father. And since then, I have seen 1,000 fathers, 10,000 fathers, wasting their lives in hatred, tossing their lives into the cesspool, and ranting on. I mean, as I was looking at those videos and the pictures of him posing over the gravesite of a veteran with a thumbs up next to the rest of the family doing the same, my first thought was, before 2024, when was this normal? What would my grandfather think of this? What would anyone's grandfather or grandmother who served think of this? It's a question that keeps coming back to me. And I don't have an answer other than righteous indignation. He also invited Laura Loomer, who was a notorious internet troll, to fly with him on his private jet. That is before his staff
informed him just how toxic she was and immediately discontinued those plans. I mean, how does anyone see somebody this naked in their contempt for everything that America stands for and still vote for him? From veterans to lawmakers to activists who have historically moved the needle towards an improvement of the lives of those we would call on as the least among us. Oh, another side note, my mom was an immigrant. Granted, she was from England, the most pigment deficient tribe outside of Norway, but nonetheless, she was an immigrant and she had green card status when she passed away last year. She never became an American citizen. Oh, and lest I forget, my grandparents on my dad's side were also firstborn of immigrants from Eastern Europe. So, lawful or unlawful, I am a byproduct of immigration. In fact, most, if not all, Americans are by default. Of course, you can look at my complexion and maybe decide whether or not you think I had been in trouble with the law once before. Well, spoiler, I have. Does that mean that I should be shipped back overseas where my grandparents came from? Or is there something else at play here? Maybe it has less to do with my cultural upbringing than it has to do with, say, the general environment that some people find themselves in. By every metric, all crime, even violent crime, is lower among immigrant populations. You'll never hear OAN or Fox News talk about that. And for all of the poetic devices that people have used to describe him, Donald Trump really is a stupid person's idea of a smart man, a poor person's idea of a rich man, a ne'er-do-well's idea of a success. And, shall it even be said, a criminal's idea of someone who stands for law and order. Now, I can sit here and I can talk about all of the flaws of Kamala Harris, and believe you me, there are plenty. But in terms of values, in terms of judgment, in terms of the type of person that I would rely on for policy, whether it's domestic or foreign, it's a no-brainer. I mean, these are not nuanced distinctions. I mean, suffice it to say, the GOP cast nuance out the fucking window back in 2015. And Tim Walz, yeah, I would rather see him on my TV every night instead of this clown who, can we just dump the guy liner once and for all, please? And I especially don't want to have to fear turning my TV off if somebody ends up saying this.
Listen, you motherfuckers, we're taxing.
Grab him by the pussy. I can do anything.
Andy, you're a shit vice president.
Lasers, and really, why don't you fuck off? How about that?
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And speaking of television, this is how anybody knows who this guy is if you were born after 1984. He played a businessman on television, but he was always a racist, always a misogynist, and always an asshole in public for all to see. I don't want my kids growing up believing that this is normal. I don't want them growing up believing that Donald Trump is the vanguard of what it means to be a leader. That's an insult to everyone who's ever wanted to lead. Now, there is no choice in this matter. We all need a return to normalcy. Me most of all, for various reasons. Whatever direction this country takes under a misogynistic dictator who promises to be it on day one, we cannot allow for that. So for those of you who haven't known about this, I have actually been doing Torah readings lately. Torah is in Judaism. I mean, look at me, come on. So for my Bible thumping friends, there's actually a passage in Deuteronomy, Shofetim. It's from Deuteronomy 16:18 to 21:9. See, I had to look that up. I'm still new at this. Basically, it lays out the commandments for a just societal structure for the tribe to survive on. Chapter 17 lays out the requirements for a tribal leader. They must be appointed by tribal members, not be a foreigner to their lands, doesn't have too many horses, too many wives, or too much gold or silver. Okay, this is ancient Hebrew. We're transliterating here. So there were different markers of wealth back then. But obviously, they're talking about somebody who is not out of touch with the day-to-day concerns with those around them. And I think that's pretty good advice. Not bad for something out of the Bronze Age. So I cannot stress this enough. Please, please, please vote for Kamala Harris if you're able on November 5th. My grandmother, who is 90 years old, who's also from England, cannot do it because she is not a citizen. She is still a resident of the country. She is a proper citizen or subject of Great Britain. I'm going to have to vote on her behalf. Well, that is, by casting my own vote. And she's already said she would vote for Kamala if she could.
Okay, so to circle back to the whole military representation, the reason I brought that up is because, well, confession time. I am by no means a water carrier for the military or law enforcement. Anybody who knows me knows that. That's why I don't run for public office. But then to hear somebody who is supposedly the law and order candidate suddenly shift his focus away from law and order and towards grievances that will target even people who are in the military, as evidenced by many former members of the military who have spoken out against him in recent months. And the reason why you're finding me in another location right now is because we have yet another report come out from not General Mark Milley. No, he already spoke.
We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die to protect it.
Now, John Kelly, one of the most reprehensible people in America for reasons that, well, should become obvious, actually came out and said this.
Well, I'm looking at the definition of fascism. It's a far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. So certainly, in my experience, those are the kind of things that he thinks would work better in terms of running America.
This election cycle has me tired all the time. It's not just from, parenting two sons, although that does contribute. It still boggles my mind that I have so many family members and friends who are supportive of a man who has openly called for termination of clauses within the Constitution. Supposedly the document that you're supposed to be defending when you're the head of state. The fact that these people, the ones that I know personally, who have not hit the pause button, have not yet pumped the brakes on their support to stop and think for themselves, what am I supporting again, is to me, it's disappointing.
Part of the reason why this video keeps changing is because so much has happened just within the last month that it's hard to keep up. Another avenue I probably should have led down was given the fact that most of all societies function for one reason and one reason only, is because individuals collectively have decided on what is important and what is not important, what is valued and what is shared in this experience that we all call reality. And for some, that sharedness, for whatever reason or other, is not compatible when it comes to the facts on the ground for some. I mean, you have an entire group of people, I think it's like 40%, who still think, unironically, that Donald Trump won the last election. And when you have a number that large, it's really hard to think about the ways that you can have dialogue with people who can't even agree on basic facts. And this has been a huge problem since 2015. I mean, let's be real here. There is no shortage of liars in Washington. I mean, there's the old joke about, how can you tell when a politician's lying? Their lips are moving. Well, there are some who actually can tell the truth from time to time, just like there are scientists who believe that the earth is round and not flat. And that may account for 99.999% of geologists. But that also doesn't take away from the fact that there is an entire model that is predicated upon not only understanding the world that we live in, but also in making predictions that we can use for a valuable outcome. So like say, for example, in 2016, when Donald Trump really did win the presidential election, it was because he won the Electoral College rather than the popular vote. Now it's being speculated that he could actually win the popular vote, but lose the Electoral College. And if that happens, that would be so fucking funny. It would also be terrifying, let's be real here. But this is the problem that I keep running into.
is how do you have these discussions with people who cannot functionally agree on what is real?
Do you trust the 2020 election results?
No, I do not.
It's the reason I did not concede after the 2022 election. Why would I concede to a fraudulent process?
What surprises me about Tony is that even though he doesn't believe elections are fair, he's running in one to be a county clerk.
I guess I'm wondering, how come, if you didn't trust what happened in 2020, how come you trust the process enough that you want to get involved now?
I honestly don't, so that's why I am getting involved and going to be the inside man and see what's going on behind it, behind the scenes.
And what do you hope to find out?
Well, I hope that it's not as crooked and there's shady stuff going on, but I will find out.
Are you hopeful?
Yes, I'm very hopeful. My daughter just turned 18, so she's going to vote and spread the word to her friends so that there is hope.
I guess to wrap things up, I don't really know what else my grandfather and I would have agreed on or disagreed on, but I do know this. We would have agreed on one thing, that Donald Trump cannot anywhere again be near the leaders of power in this country. We need someone who is stable, someone who isn't just making stuff up for their own gain. There has to be some level of normalcy again. Yes, I said it. And it might sound silly, and the more cynical types watching probably are saying, yeah, we're past that point now, buddy. But I have to at least try. If for no other reasons than at least for my boys. They deserve to live in a better world than the one I grew up in. I can almost guarantee you the one person that is not going to help is a narcissistic billionaire who is only out for himself. That person will never help someone like me because he doesn't care. I mean, do you? And just so you know how no budget this video is, this is the T-ball stand that I gave my son for Christmas. I'm using it as a tripod so that we can put this thing on top of it. You see it? I don't know if you can see it. It's this thing. It's the Joby. The Joby! If you know the Joby, you know the Joby. Okay.